We are so excited to be talking about supporting mentees with anxiety. So I'm going to share my screen. I also like to have all of your lovely faces up. So I am just getting all my screens situated. Amazing. Can you all see the slides? Yay!
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. So thank you all so much for being here. Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and be presenting with Alex. My name is Sonia Soni. I am a second year clinical psych PhD student at UMass Boston. I work with Dr. Jean Rhodes and Alex at the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring. I'm also the assistant editor or associate editor for The Chronicle, which is a newsletter and blog that's put out by Dr. Jean Rhodes, who is a expert researcher in mentoring, where we highlight, research summaries that are coming out about mentoring and the related fields, as well as interviews with folks in the field.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'm Alex. I am the Associate Director for the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring at UMass Boston, although I am coming at you all from my home in the middle of Virginia. Kind of this post-COVID world allows us to do fun things. And so I get to work remotely with wonderful graduate students like Sonia, and also other folks on our team. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist, and I see clients in the evenings. And predominantly, a lot of the kiddos and teens that I see struggle with anxiety. And anxiety is something that I have dedicated most of my training and kind of my life to figuring out how we can support people. So we are really excited to talk about what the heck is anxiety and how you all can actually support mentees and maybe some adults in your life who might be struggling with anxiety. So today we're going to talk about what the heck is anxiety, right? What does anxiety look like in kids, adolescents, and young adults? What can you do as a mentor? And then we'll talk about some additional tools and ways to support kiddos, teens, and young adults. So kicking off, what is anxiety?
So anxiety is something I am sure all of us have experienced at some point in our lives, some of us very often in our lives, and that's totally normal. It's a basic human emotion that we all experience, sometimes very regularly. And so it's really normal to feel stressed or anxious at one time or another, where all of us are likely to feel stressed out, whether we're worried about school or our health or our family. Maybe we're scared about a potentially dangerous situation. Maybe it's driving for the first time before you get your wisdom teeth removed. Some of us get anxious before getting on a plane. Or concerned about what other people think about us. So anxious feelings usually come with a variety of changes in our thoughts, our bodily reactions, our behaviors. Some of us get really sweaty. Some of us, our heart starts beating a lot faster. I know I get anxious thoughts. Some of us avoid situations, but anxiety as a whole is pretty common. And it's important to understand why it's so common and why it's actually kind of helpful. So anxiety can be actually a useful emotion. Evolutionarily, it's helped us survive and get to this point by helping us survive dangerous situations for thousands of years. For example, if you were being chased by a tiger, you would most likely be able to survive by responding with a fight or flight response. So either, attacking the tiger or running away. Your fear would increase your ability to detect danger and would prepare your body to address and respond to threats. Anxiety helps people manage threats to our health, our well-being, of ourselves and others. And a reasonable level of anxiety increases our attention, concentration, and performance. But it's pretty unlikely, unless we're Bear Grylls, that we're going to be chased by tigers. So why do we still have anxiety?
All right. So, right, anxiety does help us if we are kind of leveraging it in the right way. So, anxiety helps people manage threats, right, to our health and well-being, or for folks around them. And a reasonable level of anxiety increases attention, concentration, and performance, like Sonia just said. So, one way that anxiety can actually help us, right, is that our anxious thoughts, one, are trying to protect us, keep us alive, but our anxiety is also trying to manage threats in our future. So when we have something that's really important to us, right, so for a kid, a young adult, a teen, if they are studying for an upcoming test, right, or if they have a test that's coming up and their grades are really important to them, they might feel really anxious thinking about taking that test. Why do they feel anxious, right? Well, because it's important to them. They want to do well. They're motivated to get good grades. And so those anxious thoughts, those anxious feelings may actually help motivate kiddos and teens to study and prepare for a test so that they do well in service of the things that are important to them. But we're not here to talk about kind of the anxiety that motivates us to take care of ourselves, or are we, right? Instead, we're actually talking about, right, the less helpful anxiety. And I like to call it unhelpful anxiety because, right, no feelings are bad. All emotions are valid. Anxiety is okay. And I don't ever want to label a specific emotion as something we don't want to feel. Instead, right, we can think about anxiety as something that helps motivate us to keep us kicking and going strong and doing well. And then there's going to be less anxiety that tells us, hey, stop doing something. And sometimes that's not very helpful in the present moment. So today we're talking about helping your mentees, right, overcome some of this less helpful thinking, this less helpful anxiety. What all of us know, right, is that anxiety can really get in the way of our day-to-day lives. So anxiety tells us to avoid the scary things, right? Anxiety tells us, stay safe, don't do the scary things, let's stay alive. So anxiety, though, can be harmful when it stops us from doing things that are actually kind of important for us to do, right? So if you imagine that you are working with a mentee who might be a little kid and they might be afraid of the dark, and because they're afraid of the dark, they refuse to go into, you know, their basement, let's say, or their grandma's basement. Maybe grandma's basement doesn't have a great light and they refuse to go down there, and they get in trouble when, you know, grandma says, hey, could you go downstairs and like grab this thing out of the basement for me? And the kid goes, absolutely not, right? That is getting in the kid's way, right, of living their life. So this anxiety can stop us from doing things that are important to us or important to those around us. And so we want to help you all figure out, right, how you can support your mentees to live the lives that are important to them by overcoming some of these anxious thoughts. All right. So what does anxiety look like, right? I think all of you can probably identify how you feel when you may feel anxious, right? And for kids and teens and young adults, it's no different. So anxiety can present in a lot of different ways. So you might have a kiddo or a teen who has difficulty concentrating, right? Anxious thoughts playing in our head all day long can make us totally distracted, right? It might be really hard to read a book if you're having a lot of anxious thoughts, right? If you're wondering, like, oh man, I texted my best friend and they didn't text me back. Why didn't they text me back? I don't know. Like, do they hate me? Am I like a stupid person? Am I a bad friend? If I have that running monologue in my head all day long, I of course can't concentrate on reading a book, right? It could also lead to difficulty falling asleep, right? So if I have difficulty kind of turning down those anxious thoughts late at night, I could spend all night just worrying myself, right? And never sleeping. It could also be difficult to stay asleep, right? So kiddos may wake up from having nightmares or have dreams filled with lots of scary situations. Constantly worrying, what if, right? If you've ever talked to somebody with a lot of anxiety, right? They might always be thinking, well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? Also, right, anxiety can come with actual physical sensations. So some kiddos, some teens, some adults hold their anxiety really, really, really tight, right? And so you can imagine all of this tension, maybe, in your shoulders and your back and your legs and your hands and your jaw, right? If you clench your jaw, this tension is associated with anxiety. Some kiddos will report that they have tummy aches, and sometimes those tummy aches might actually be those nauseous feelings when they're feeling worried or scared or anxious. Associated with that, right, kiddos might not want to eat. So because they're nauseous, because they don't feel good, because they're really, really tense, their body is just, not processing food the same way, or they might not feel hungry. And so they're so like, no, thank you, I'm not going to eat. And getting irritable, right? So put yourself in this situation where you're having difficulty concentrating, you're having difficulty falling asleep, you're feeling tense, you're feeling unwell. Of course, you're going to be irritable, right? You got this inner monologue in your head going, what if, I'm scared, I'm terrified, I feel terrible. Of course, you're going to be cranky, right? So if you have cranky kiddos, that also might be a sign that they're anxious. Younger kids, and you may all have experienced this, younger kids may have difficulty separating from loved ones or trusted adults, right? And we call this separation anxiety. And then teens and young adults can also think a lot about and have anxiety tied to social situations. So thinking about the teenage years, that is a time really fraught with understanding who you are in the world and how you're interacting with others, and how you not only interact with your family, and those are important to you, but also, right, you're starting to really leverage your friends and your social network to help you regulate your emotions, right? This transition from this childhood to young adulthood is really kind of also associated with this transition from really, really, really relying on the family unit to then also incorporating friends as important pieces of your social network. So kids and young adults really worry about social situations. So thoughts might be associated with like having peers that think they're weird or not cool or not funny. They might have difficulty talking to strangers, right? They might avoid going to school. They might avoid talking on the phone, right? How many kiddos do you talk to today, or like people my age, and like, I am so anxious, I will not talk on the phone. You let me text, you let me email, great, but I will not talk to somebody on the phone, right? You hear that all the time. What is that? That's anxiety, right? Kids and teens may worry about what others will think of them, what they say, what they do, what they wear, right? So kids and teens might be like, love something one day and then hate something the next because suddenly it's out of style. And if they wear it, they're no longer cool, right? So kids really have this like social thing on the brain. They might be worried that they'll do something dumb in front of their peers. They might be scared of being criticized, and they might be scared of showing signs of being anxious. So another whole level, right? I know when I was in high school and middle school, if you asked me to give a presentation, I stood up in front of the class, my hands would be shaking, my voice would be shaking, and my mind would go blank. I would have absolutely nothing, right? And so in addition to being afraid of what everybody thought about me, also then being afraid of like, oh my gosh, people know I'm anxious. So it's this like added layer. Hated it. Who knew I would enjoy giving talks like this in the future? So not me. So let's see. I think Sadia, I think I turn to you now.
Yeah. So something to note, it's really, so like Alex was describing, right? Anxiety is going to show up in a ton of different ways. And it's really important that as mentors, we're able to recognize all of those different signs. But an important note is that some of those signs may also be something other than anxiety. A lot of the times, some of the times we see these symptoms, they might also be indicative of trauma or depression or another serious mental health challenge that these kiddos are facing. So it's really, really important to talk to a mentee's parent or guardian if you notice something. When we think about how to talk to mentees, parents, and guardians about this, it can be difficult, right? It's going to be really hard to talk to a parent and say, hey, is there something else that's going on? But something that is really helpful to keep in mind when we're doing this is that we're not responsible for diagnosing our mentee, right? As a mentor, that's not your role. Your role is to figure out, how do we support our mentee to work towards the goals that we've set together to help them achieve the things that they want to achieve. It's really important to keep that in mind. Really important to be conscious of cultural considerations. Talking about mental health is really difficult in a lot of different cultures for a lot of different reasons. And so just keeping that in mind before you talk to a parent and say, hey, I think your kid has anxiety, and maybe framing it from, emphasizing that experiencing anxiety is normal, normalizing the experience, but it might be interfering with the child's day-to-day. This anxiety is showing up in a way that is keeping your child from showing up to classes, doing the best that they can in school, making friends, and focusing on the functional things that are happening in the situations where the anxiety is showing up, instead of saying, I think your kid might have anxiety. So going back a little bit, Alex has talked a lot about anxiety making us avoid things. And a big part of anxiety continuing to persist is because, by its nature, anxiety makes us avoid the really, really scary things, because our anxiety learns that it was really scary and we need to keep avoiding it. And there's a model in how we understand anxiety called the cycle of anxiety that really helps us understand this. So we start off with an anxiety producing situation. Let's take public speaking, for example, right? Let's say I'm feeling super, super anxious about doing this talk. And I am just, oh my gosh, this talk is coming up. I've been asked to show up and talk to you all. And I am just feeling so anxious and so nervous and so worried. My palms are sweating. I am wearing extra sweaters to cover up my pit stains because I'm like, no one can see this. No one can know that I'm feeling anxious. I'm being overwhelmed. I have all these thoughts in my head that are like, I'm just not going to do well. Let's say that anxiety is so bad that I'm just not going to show up. I'm going to abandon Alex, not show up, and none of you are going to see me. So you don't have to see how anxious I am. I don't need to feel the things I'm feeling right now because I'm just avoiding the situation. It's making me too anxious. So then I get some short-term relief. Maybe I'm not as sweaty. Maybe I've calmed down a little bit. And I'm like, okay, the rest of my day, it's going to be peaceful because I didn't have to do this talk. But what I ended up teaching myself is that giving a talk is so anxiety producing that I need to avoid it. And so what happens is my fear of talking in public and presenting to you all actually gets worse. And our brain learns that when the anxiety producing situation happens, when I'm being asked to give a presentation, that if I avoid it, all the symptoms will go away. And so it happens again and again and again. And I end up avoiding and avoiding and avoiding. And it gets to a point where I just can't think about presenting, let alone be asked to present something.
Awesome. All right. So now you've learned the basics of anxiety. You probably already knew a lot of that, right? Anxiety, like we said, is totally normal. Everybody experiences it at some point. So why are you all here, right? It's probably because you want to support your mentees who might feel anxious, right? You are on the ground, you are working with people, you are there to support them, you care about their well-being, right? So we are going to be talking about some things that you can actually do with your mentees if you notice that they might be feeling anxious or if they tell you that they're anxious, right? So as a mentor, there's a lot that you can do. So like I said, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I firmly believe that, and Jolyn has heard me say this probably 100 times, I firmly believe that you do not need to have an advanced degree or advanced training or tons of years of school in order to be an effective, helpful person, right? You all in here, just whatever your background is, whatever kind of training you've received, you care about the people that you work with, and you can provide support that is actually helpful, right? We all know this. That's why you're all mentors. So I'm really excited to give you some of these tips and tricks that you can start using whenever you see your mentee next, if they feel anxious, right? So first and foremost is to normalize feeling anxiety, right? This is so critical that it is important for your mentees to know that it is okay if they feel anxious, right? So if your mentee talks about feeling scared, anxious, worried, whatever, normalize that those feelings are okay. They're allowed to have them, right? So an example might be something like, I'm supposed to go to the dentist tomorrow, but I don't want to go. I'm really scared, right? They may have had bad experiences in the past, right? A dentist might be really scary. It might be really painful, right? And so if your mentee is like, I just don't want to go, I'm so scared, right? One reaction might be, don't be a baby, right? There's nothing scary about the dentist. Terrible response, right? What is that doing? Right? That is invalidating your mentee's actual fears, their beliefs, right? It is telling your mentee that they should not feel anxious and that they should not tell you their feelings, right? By invalidating them, that is reinforcing the fact that you don't care about how they feel. You are going to tell them how they feel. In reality, that might not be what you mean by saying, like, don't be a baby, right? Like, don't feel anxious. But that's what a kid might hear, right? So you really want to think about something that can really validate their feelings, right? So belittling, ignoring, or telling your mentee to suck it up can invalidate, and this can lead them to believe that they shouldn't express their emotions or that they should feel ashamed for feeling a certain way. Instead, right, you might say something like, ugh, but it's okay to feel nervous, right? Lots of people feel worried about the dentist. What scares you about it, right? So instead, approaching your kiddo with validation and kindness and curiosity, right? So just asking a simple question, like, what is scary about it? Learn more, kind of lean in, see what is actually going through their mind, right? So encourage your mentee to express any and all feelings that they have. All feelings tell us something useful and important. And you can use this as an opportunity to learn more about what they're thinking, what's going on in their brain, right? My guess is that their answer might surprise you, right? If you say, what's scary? Why are you afraid, right? What's going on, right? You might have a sense of what they're going to say, but you don't know for sure. So take this as a learning opportunity to connect. Sure, I'm on track. All right. And I think, Sonia, do I pass this over to you? Yes, maybe.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. So after we normalize feeling anxious with our mentees, another helpful thing that we can do is to help them realize that our brain isn't always telling us the truth, especially when it comes to anxiety. It's really easy to believe everything our brain tells us. It's the thing that helps us decide what's going on in the world. But sometimes, especially our anxious thoughts, aren't always true. So, for example, there's a monster under the bed. Probably not true,
but it feels believable.
but it feels believable. You're going to fail this test no matter what you do. Your friends didn't text you back. That means they hate you.
I know.
I feel this one all the
feel
time.
this one all the time, right? This one's pretty common.
Your presentation is really boring. Look, someone just yawned. I'm really hoping none of you are yawning right now. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that our brain can kind of be a jerk. Just because we think it doesn't mean it's always real. Thoughts are just thoughts. So if you notice your mentee telling you things that their anxious brain is telling them, you can help remind them that their brain might not be telling the truth, especially when it comes to really, things like, no matter what I do, I'm not going to do well on this test. No matter what I say, no one is going to like me. No matter how hard I tried, I'm just not going to be able to make friends. So one activity that we can do with our mentees is called Name Your Anxious Brain. Kids are really great at, they have really great imaginations and can benefit from distancing themselves from their anxious thoughts. And you can start by asking your mentees, what does your anxious brain look like? What's its name? I think Alex does a really great job with this. And I really appreciate this one anecdote that she has of a client that she's worked with and done this activity with.
Yep. So one of my kind of favorite therapy anecdotes is I was working with a girl who was about 11 or 12, and she was really anxious, right? She would come in, she wouldn't even talk to me. Her parents would come in with her and they'd try to explain like what she was worried about, but really like we weren't making a ton of progress because she was just so scared, even in therapy, right? Even when I was trying to help her kind of overcome some of these big fears. So we tried this activity, right? And I was like, all right, guys, we're going to dive in. We're going to start talking about your anxious brain, right? Let's name your anxious brain, right? So I'm going to give you a sheet of paper. I want you to draw it. She drew this really nice, ugly kind of critter monster. And I was like, all right, like, what are you going to name this brain? And she goes, jerk face. I'm like, awesome name, right? And so part of, realizing that our brain isn't always telling us the truth is we always want to then remind ourselves that our brain might not be telling us the truth. So I enlisted the support of her parents, right? And so I said, to this little girl, I was like, hey, whenever your parents see you maybe getting anxious, right, can they remind you or ask you if it's jerk face talking or if it's actually like the truth? And she goes, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So over the next couple of weeks, right, I don't see them, they come back. And it turns out that not only, right, do the parents now kind of ask her like, hey, is that jerk face talking if she talks about being worried? But she has also flipped it on them because go figure, parents are also a little anxious, right? Whenever her parents say something that's an anxious thought, she goes, hey, your jerk face is talking, right? And what that does, that gives our brain a timeout to say, hey, is this real? Or is this my anxious brain telling me something that is not helping me in this moment? This is not something that's serving me at this time. And so by creating a common like lingo, right? They're not saying like, that's anxious thinking, right? They're kind of being cute. They're calling each other out on like jerk face. Right? Like it makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit less stigmatizing, and a little bit more engaging. So I really like this technique With younger kiddos, teens, some teens really like this. And then with like older kind of like college students, I tell clients to say, thank you, brain, but I have something else to do, right? So like, I hear you, thank you, and move on. So really acknowledging that sometimes our brain isn't telling us the truth. All right, a big scary monster might be jerk face, right? So then, do I take over back now, Sonia?
Yes, for
Okay,
a
perfect.
therapy detour.
So after, right, you're validating anxious feelings, you're helping your mentee realize that the anxious brain might not always be telling the truth, right? Your next step, your third step is helping your mentee learn how to talk back, right? Learn how to talk back to that jerk face. Learn how to talk back to that anxious brain that is trying to get you to avoid the scary things, right? Instead, you want your mentee to engage in the world, not avoid the scary things, to do the things that are important to them, right? So you're going to help them think in new ways. Quick therapy detour before we dive into here, right? So why we know that this is actually helpful for people, right? We have this model. So Sonia showed you another model a few minutes ago. We have another model with a triangle. We get lots of shapes here in therapy, right? So some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but essentially we like to think about people's reactions to situations in three different components. So first component is thoughts. Thoughts are going to be what you're playing in your head. These can be words, these can be images. These are the things in your brain. We also have our feelings. So feelings are those physical sensations in our body, and they're also those emotion words, right? So calm, happy, anxious, scared, mad, glad, tense, sweaty, nauseous, jittery, right? Anything that you can imagine going on in your body, any of those emotion words. And then finally, behaviors, right? Fly on the wall. What can I actually see going on? So in any situation, right, we have our thoughts, we have our feelings, and we have our behaviors. Right now, for me, right, fly on a wall. If you all are flies on a wall, you're seeing me at my computer, right? I have a window in front of me, like I'm sitting down, I am talking. Those are my behaviors. My thoughts are the words. I'm like forming my words ahead of time, what I'm explaining, right? Those are the things that are going through my head. And then my feelings might be like excited because I love talking about anxiety and I love kind of talking about this information, right? If instead my thoughts are, everybody hates me, everybody is bored, this, like, people are going to think this is a waste of time, right? My feelings might then be anxious, scared, nervous. And my behaviors, instead of having my words come out and like me kind of being like relatively more engaging, instead, I might be really clammed up, I might be really quiet, and I might just kind of mumble my parts, right? So at any given time, we have thoughts, we have feelings, and we have behaviors. What we know through decades of research, decades of doing therapy, one helpful tool for helping people get better from anxiety is helping people learn to think in different ways in response to stressful situations, right? This is not saying just put on rose-colored glasses and the world is going to be great, because that's not how life works. Instead, it's learning how to evaluate what your brain is saying and then questioning it and seeing if there is something closer to reality that's more helpful in the situation. Right. So you're going to help your mentee talk back to their anxiety, say things that are a little more kind, a little more realistic, a little more helpful, right? So when your brain or your mentee's brain says, avoid the scary things, right? You can say, let's talk back to that. So the first thing that you can do to talk back to your anxious brain is gather evidence, right? How realistic is this thought, right? What is the evidence you have? Could you go before a judge and jury and present the facts of the case, right? So if, let's see, do I have an example? I want to make sure I have. Nope. So if I have a mentee who is saying, well, my friend, I texted my best friend and they left me on red, right? They have their red receipts on. And then I see that they read it and they didn't respond, right? I asked them if they wanted to hang out and they just didn't respond. And now it's been 2 days. They hate me, right? That's it. That's it. How realistic is that, right? Like your brain is telling you that's very real. That is what's going on in the situation. But could you go before a judge and jury and say, because my friend didn't text me back, right? That means they hate me. Could you actually prove that? Or are there alternative explanations that could also explain why they read the message and haven't responded, right? Are there other things that your brain isn't telling you that actually could be accurate? Right? Then the next step is once you've played detective, right? Are there things that are alternatives to that first thought that is true and maybe more realistic, right? Or what's going to be more helpful in this moment? So going back to this example of my friend hasn't texted me back in 2 days. They hate me. They think I'm dumb. They never want to see me again, right? Well, are you sure that something hasn't come up, right? Could your friend have gotten in trouble and gotten grounded and had their phone taken away before they respond, right? Is your friend forgetful? Do they open up their phone, read something, and then get distracted and walk away and just totally forget because they read it and it was marked as read and they just totally forgot that you sent it to them, right? These are all possible, right? Alternatives to the best friend hating your mentee, right? We don't know. Everybody is different. The best friend may not be happy, right? But it also could be the case that the mentee's friend just forgot and isn't actually mad at them, right? So thinking
Another
about, yeah.
Another thing that I find helpful in this specific situation is thinking about, Alex mentioned gathering evidence. Has your friend, responded in the past before? Have they taken maybe a few days to respond? Okay. Is this just your anxiety coming up because, they haven't responded, but we know that they do respond. We have other evidence to show us, no, I don't think that they hate me. Did I do something that made them hate me? No, I don't think I did anything that made them hate me. So gathering evidence too to help come up with something that's more true and realistic, and finding that what's more helpful in the moment.
Yep. Thank you. And then third, right? So first, gathering evidence. Second, coming up with an alternative thought that might be more true than what your anxious brain is whispering or yelling at you. And then third, right? Always reminding your mentee, right, that they can tolerate these feelings. Our brain is so deceptive and so tricky that every time we feel terrible, our brain tries to trick us into believing that we are going to feel terrible for the rest of our lives, right? Have you ever gone through a breakup and been really sad? Your brain probably tells you you're going to be sad the rest of your life. In reality, we get over it, right? Like it feels bad for a period of time, but we're resilient, right? We can come back again, right? Our brain wants us to think that when we feel bad, we're going to feel this way for the rest of our lives. It is so cruel. In reality, that's not what happens, right? So reminding your mentee that even if they are feeling anxious, that it's okay and that they're going to get through it, right? It's okay to feel anxiety sometimes. Sometimes it is scary to give a talk, right? Sometimes it is scary to take a test. And just because it's scary doesn't mean they have to avoid it, right? Your mentee is strong and can handle feeling anxious.
So an important reminder is that these recommendations are good for anxious thinking that exaggerates threats, like giving a talk, like your friend not responding, like not knowing if you're going to do well on a test. We do not recommend these techniques or ways of approaching anxiety for youth that are dealing with racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, abuse, neglect, bullying, or other very, very real thoughts. Using these techniques in the face of those very real threats will minimize what the mentee is experiencing, and the checking if your brain is telling you the truth, the finding alternative reasons, the talking back and tolerating, not helpful for these very real threats. And we would recommend, other resources if your mentee is experiencing these things.
Yeah, thank you. We also will we'll wrap up in a second, but also we just like to point out additional tools if your mentee does feel anxious, or if you feel anxious and just want some additional support, right? So a great app for kids and teens is called Super Better. It's free and it basically gamifies taking care of yourself. So if you have a mentee who is constantly addicted to their phone and you want them to use it in a relatively more healthy way, right? Super Better has different tasks that they can do to take care of themselves, and they build points in kind of taking care of themselves. So it's super cool. We also like to always recommend things like Headspace, Healthy Minds. Mindfulness meditation apps can be really great for essentially building up your brain muscles, right? It gives you a chance to learn how to kind of calm down your anxious thinking, really reflect on what's going on in your brain, and having that kind of time for reflection and space can be incredibly helpful for really changing the way you think in the face of anxiety. And if you have any kids and teens or adults in your lives who are struggling with anything kind of mental health related, and therapy just isn't like an option that they are ready to try, or they want some just support kind of broadly, you can go to One Mind Cyber Guide, which is a website we're happy to provide you information with. And this takes all of the evidence from lots of good research and distills it into one website. And you can just click on the things that you want to work on, and it gives you the apps, and it tells you whether or not they're based in research and how helpful they can be, and gives you information on their privacy policies and all of that good stuff. So I always like to recommend additional resources that are free and out there for folks like you who are doing good work by supporting your mentees. So lots of good resources out there. And we can put the key takeaways up, but yeah, anxiety is normal, right? There are signs of anxiety because it can present in a lot of different ways. Your role as a mentor, you can normalize feeling anxious and model healthy behavior, right? Teaching your mentee to recognize their anxious brain is the first step, right? Talking back to our anxious brain really helps us live the life we want to live and not avoid the scary things, right? And there are lots of good resources to support you and your mentee. So anything to add, Sonia?
No.
Amazing. I will stop sharing, but yeah, happy to answer any questions before the end of the hour. But thank you all so much for listening and attending. It's really great to see so many people who care about the young people that they're working with. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Sonia and Alex. Yeah, maybe we have time for like one or two questions. If you have a question, feel free. Yeah,
Hi,
Jill.
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for this. And by the way, I just finished reading Jean's book because I'm doing a project on mentorship with Evergreen State College. So yeah, I'm really excited by her numbers, and it's made my interviews with Big Brothers Big Sisters very interesting. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yes.
Um, so one of the things that really stood out to me is to tell youth that they can tolerate those feelings. And what I find in working with youth is this whole thing of, I don't want to be triggered. It's a huge one. And if
Yeah.
you like, how have you been working with that? Because there's this like, I don't want anything that affects me, but they're still very anxious. They're internalizing it, but they don't want to be triggered. And I go to Evergreen State College, and there's a lot of that there, and a lot of like they have all this anxiety, but they're not even processing. So how do you tell people you can tolerate this when it's not that list of, abuse and racism and homophobia? How do you tell them you can tolerate this, and let's put that trigger thing aside, because it's actually a handicap to continually say, I'm triggered, so I can't talk about it.
100%. I think that is a great question. I think it's all, and I think, you probably know this because you're actually, on the ground doing this work, right? But it's all about how you present it, right? And it's all about not being combative. And I mean, that's a lot of like what we do in therapy too, right? Is that somebody comes in and they're like, I don't want to think about the scary things. I don't want to talk about the scary things. And being that person is like, yeah, I hear you. It does suck to feel these things, right? Like, you don't want to engage in this. You don't want to be triggered. I hear you. And what kind of sucks is that what we know is actually the most helpful is engaging with the hard stuff, processing the hard stuff, thinking about the hard stuff, and really digging in and understanding like why it might be right triggering or why it might be upsetting, right? So let's dig into it. Also, you want to do it in the right place and time, right? So talking about somebody's like childhood abuse just on the street is not going to be, the right space and time. Right. So I think you have a good sense of this, right? But it's like time and approach and really just like validating, right? But that's a great question. Sonia, anything to add?
Do you have specific exercises or things like that that basically shows them how to take away the power from that triggering?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the first piece about, validating, acknowledging, normalizing that, of course, this scary thing is going to be scary. It's going to be hard. I think when we think about anxiety, we think about why it's so easy for us to avoid anxiety, naming that as, avoid the thing that gives us anxiety, naming that as well, right? Helping the person when they're ready, like understand, hey, yeah, this thing was really scary. I understand why you would want to avoid it. Actually, we know that the more we avoid it, the bigger that fear gets. And especially when it comes to, things that, again, are not those issues that we named, engaging with them slowly with support gives us better understanding of, it helps combat that fear because, we learned, I can tolerate it. So some of it is teaching your mentee, you can tolerate it. Some of it is, like them learning that they can tolerate it by working through it slowly, right? I'm not going to go and give a presentation the first day of school because that terrifies me. But I've been avoiding classes because I don't want to give a presentation. Okay, I can start by sitting up maybe closer to the front row. Not the front row, but I can sit a little bit closer and a little bit closer. I can raise my hand maybe one class. And you work on it slowly so that you build up that tolerance and that they learn that they can tolerate these things. I think there